What is up, guys, and welcome to another PLO poker coaching hand breakdown. We are reviewing a hand here played in one of my recent videos. I'll put the link before if you guys want to see that in real time, where I was kind of talking through the hand and my thought process. And this is something that I strongly recommend that you do in terms of recording your sessions and actually talk through your thought process in game, because it's going to make your studying a lot more effective in terms of identifying conceptual misunderstandings that you might have. And I'm going to show you how that kind of plays out here, because that is something that I identified in this hand and was able to sort of learn as a whole to improve my overall game. So when we look at this hand, this is a 1-2 hand on ignition. Raise from the small blind and get called by the big blind. And when we're playing small blind versus big blind, there's going to be a very wide range of c-betting that goes on. So from under 10% to over 90% with the different boards in play. This particular board is not fantastic for us. It's relatively disconnected though, and it is two-tone, which does help us because we're going to have a slight equity advantage in terms of the overpairs with flush draws. Whereas in a lot of other spots, the two-tone board out of position is often something with a much higher sort of check frequency. So we'll do a good amount of checking on this board, but it's not going to be full range. So make sure that you are finding some of the leads here. And when we do actually get to this flop, I did sort of decide to go ahead and lead. And my thought here was, we can fold out some marginal equity. We can actually call a raise, and we should be somewhat far ahead of our opponent's range with the blockers that we do have in play. And we do block a lot of the raising range as well. Looking back at it, I actually think that I would prefer a check here. We don't really want to inflate this pot with a marginal hand and start getting stacks in. We also have plenty of playability if this goes check with the straight blocker and the flush draw. And also, our opponent in game was a bit tighter than what he should be, and so he probably has a stronger range here than a normal big blind defending range. So it likely means that we should lean more towards checking. But not a big mistake. It's very close in the solver as well as to whether you kind of lead or bet here. So we do bet and we do get called, and we get these 7 of hearts on the turn. And on this card, we're going to have just quite a limited lead frequency, which I did identify in game. This is not a great card for our range. We're going to be up against, a lot of two pairs, straights, and even some sort of sets that the big blind will have a lot more of us than us, right? We're, most of our kind of value range here on these boards is going to be overpairs with flush draws, so straightening runouts are not fantastic for us. If we were going to lead on this card, it's going to come from straights, especially if we don't have clubs, and then also going to come from straight draw blockers with flush draws, right? So when we're kind of bluffing our position, we do want some equity. So our hand doesn't really fit either one of those categories. We still have obviously a lot of equity here though, so we do go ahead and just go for the check call, which I think is pretty standard and is probably the most standard street that we played here. So we do check and we face the sort of 2/3 pot size bet, and we do call. And then we get the ace of clubs on the river, which is where my misunderstanding, sort of mistake, sort of happened on this street, I think. My thought was that the ace of clubs is a good card for us, because when you think about the hands that our opponent is going to bet with on the turn for a reasonably large sizing, it should be either made hands or it should be sort of nut flush type blocker hands, right? That he's not going to want to get check raised off that sort of equity. So he shouldn't be betting too many like king and queen high flush draws on the turn. And so I'm thinking that the ace of clubs is a good card for us. And it does mean that we have more nut flushes, more king high flushes than our opponent, almost double in fact. So it gives us this quite large polarity advantage. But what it actually does is it reduces our number of overall flushes total, because we have to remember that we also um, led the flop. So when we lead the flop, that's going to contain a lot of our nut flush draws. Um, so when the actual ace of clubs hits on the river, that diminishes our overall flushes that we can have. But it does give us a slight polarity advantage. So what that means for our betting range realistically is that we're going to go for this pot size bet or check approach. And if you think about having those two sizings, right, this hand falls like right in the middle of like a medium strong bluff catcher type hand. So we would obviously go ahead and check. So that was kind of my misunderstanding here, and you can see it in the solver as well. So when we have when we get to this turn, when we check call the turn and we get the ace of clubs, we don't really have much of a small sizing on this particular card. But if it's something like the nine of clubs that we call on, we see that the block bet sizing goes up like pretty drastically, and we will start using that sizing a good amount more, just because we have more flushes in general in our range that we can bet a little thinner for value with. So when we go ahead and bet small here, we're actually making two mistakes. One, we're not understanding that we have such a large polarity advantage and we don't have as many of these middling strength hands. And then two, we also have the 8 and the 7 in our hand, which if you look from a solver's perspective especially, when we're blocking showdown value like this, we often want to check because we're blocking the check back range from our opponent. So he's going to have to stab with his bluffs. He's going to have to take more stabs at the pot that we can then pick off, right? So if you look here in terms of leading, obviously on the ace of clubs, we are going to have a decent lead frequency with clubs. But then if you add in an ace, you can see that we're basically checking almost full range because we block the showdown value. And if you have a hand like 8-7, you can see that it elevates, or if you also include blocking the straight, we're checking basically full range. So I think here, pretty clear check on the river, and that was kind of my conceptual misunderstanding. My logic in game as well was that he might check back more straights than he should, than the solver might bet with a flush blocker or something like that. That's not the case. The solver would be checking back all straights, just based on like the polarity of my range at the end here. So I think misjudging the sort of polarity that I had in my range made me pick an incorrect bet sizing, and we definitely should have gone for a check here. And then once we get raised, obviously it's like not a great spot, but in my head I'm thinking, what hands does he bet that end up here with the nut flush? And the only combos I could kind of come up with in my head were if he had the straight and he had the nut flush draw. That makes sense to obviously bet on the turn. And given that we have clubs, that sort of limits those combos that he has of that. So we did go ahead and call, and he did show us the nuts, and he did turn the nuts as well. So he did have one of those combos, and in the end, it was a little bit of a punt. We probably could have saved some big blinds here by just check calling the river, by better understanding the ranges in play. So that's gonna be it from me. Drop some comments below. Let me know if you would have played the hand differently, or what you would have done. But other than that, thanks for tuning in, and good luck at the tables out there.